Every anime story has a distinct set of characters. There's an optimistic person who would give up everything for the sake of his loved ones. Then we have an overambitious guy who's haunted by his past trauma, and then there's the one character whom almost everybody hates. And the same applies to one of the most sensational animes of all time, Naruto. Known for its epic storyline that runs over 700 anime episodes, Naruto has become a pop culture sensation that has stretched far and wide across the globe. Simultaneously, the characters have played an influential role as much as the plot itself. Yet, among the many various personalities that make up the cast of the Naruto franchise, Orochimaru acquires a unique position among the list of antagonists that appear in this story. One of the eminent members of the Sannin, Orochimaru has been a monumental figure in shaping the storyline of Naruto, as well as that of Naruto Shippuden. His lust for knowledge of the world's secrets goes in tandem with his evil exploits to destroy his natal place, Konohagakure, all for the sake of his aspiration to outlive everyone and perhaps conquer death itself. In this video, we will be exploring Orochimaru's anatomy as we talk about his backstory, abilities, and why he's so obsessed with the idea of eternal life. The third Hokage's student that destroys the hidden leaf. Orochimaru's role as the big bad of Naruto Part 1. Orochimaru first appears in episode 27 of the Naruto anime series, during the second stage of the Chunin exam. Interestingly, Orochimaru acquired the vessel of a female genin belonging to Kusagakure, that is, the hidden village in the grass. This vessel was to take part in the second part of the Chunin exam, which would be held in the Forest of Death. Orochimaru's debut scene featured two important aspects that would later anticipate his true nature as one of the main antagonists in the series. One, his snake-like attributes. In episode 27, Anko's defensive stance, which seemed to protect Naruto, was instigated by the sudden and malicious presence of Orochimaru's female vessel that had snuck right behind our protagonist. In quite a twisted manner, Orochimaru, using his serpentine tongue, handed over the first kunai knife that Anko had thrown in his direction as a warning. The second aspect, however, would be revealed much later during the Chunin exam, when in his fight against the third Hokage, Orochimaru would proclaim his mastery over the living corpse reincarnation technique as his ultimate solution to human mortality. However, this manic obsession with eternal life is not something that developed overnight. It was the culmination of his past trauma that eventually shaped him into the person he would become in Naruto. Orochimaru was a young orphan when he was taken in as a pupil by Hiruzen Sarutobi, that is, the third Hokage. He became an important part of Sarutobi's shinobi team, with Jiraiya and Tsunade as his comrades. Orochimaru eventually turned out to be a brilliant ninja with an intellect that was far superior to his friends. Moreover, Orochimaru had an insatiable hunger for knowledge about the secrets of the world, particularly the possibilities of immortality for human beings. As per the canonical information, Orochimaru's obsession with eternal life probably stemmed from the fact that he had lost his parents at a very early age. Although he is a sadist with a scheming mind, it would be wrong to assume that Orochimaru did not care for any human soul at all. In fact, the deaths of both Tsunade's brother Nawaki and her lover Dan during the Second Shinobi World War affected Orochimaru to a great extent. Thus, the Second Shinobi World War convinced the serpent-like Sannin of the need to come up with different ways to sustain human life from the clutches of mortality. This eventually culminated in Orochimaru defecting from Konohagakure to pursue his ambitions of eternal life. After years of unethical experiments conducted over fellow shinobis and people from different clans, Orochimaru was finally able to create the living corpse reincarnation technique. Besides this, his lust for power further motivated him to assassinate his own teacher during the final round of the Chunin exam. Prior to this, he made alliances with the 4th Kazekage of Sand Village, and he recruited like-minded ninjas and wide-eyed aspirants alike to create his own hidden village in Odogakure, aka the Hidden Sound Village, with the assistance of his right-hand man Kabuto. While he wished to destroy Konohagakure at all costs, Orochimaru had another objective: to keep track of Sasuke Uchiha's whereabouts, which eventually allowed him to inflict his cursed seal on him during the Chunin exam. Unfortunately, the success of Orochimaru's campaign was attained at the cost of his arms, which were rendered useless by the help of Sarutobi's Reaper Death Seal. Though it took a considerable amount of time for him to get his arms back, Orochimaru continued using the living corpse reincarnation in order to alleviate his pain from the injuries he sustained in his fight against Sarutobi. He could only use basic non-chakra based techniques like the summoning jutsu to hold his own in a battle, and yet Orochimaru with just summoning is as strong as Naruto in his version 2 tailed beast form. To put things into perspective, when Naruto Naruto entered V2 as a child during his training with Jiraiya, he nearly blew his master's chest apart with a Rasengan. Orochimaru tanks multiple hits from Naruto and even pays him back some before ending their little playtime. Over the course of Naruto, Orochimaru is shown to have taken over the bodies of 3 different people. Brownie points if you can guess who these people were. Secondly, the most horrifying aspect of Orochimaru's body morphing tendency is that he can take the shape of his original physical attributes while in possession of someone else's vessel. But is body switching the only ability Orochimaru has? Certainly not. After all, being declared a Sannin by the legendary Hanzo requires more than just body morphing abilities. So let's explore more. He has an insane anatomy even without the body switching. Orochimaru's crazy body. Orochimaru's Serpentine abilities are an extension of his own personality as a cold-blooded entity with zero regard for mankind. At the same time, it hints at the unique physiological structure that allows him to use certain techniques that do require serpent-like moves. Here, we've listed some of his most memorable techniques, which have become an intrinsic part of Orochimaru's identity as the Snake Shinobi. Soft Physique Modification. In the Soft Physique Modification technique, the individual dislocates the joints and uses the chakra to modify his own anatomy, thus making it more flexible and elastic in nature. This enables the user to bend and stretch their bodies into any shape and length while also being able to retract to their original form later on. Brilliant for espionage and surveillance over enemies, the Soft Physique Modification technique has been used time and time again by Orochimaru to elongate any of his body parts at his own will. The first instance of the Snake Shinobi using Soft Physique Modification was when he inflicted his cursed seals on Sasuke during the second stage of the Chunin exams. Moreover, Orochimaru uses this technique to wrap around enemies and restrain them. It can also help the user to squeeze through constricted spaces. In a way, the user would seem to be moving in a snake-like fashion. Gathering of the Snakes. While snakes are often seen as synonymous with ideas of torture and death, they also represent healing and recuperation, and that is exactly what the Gathering of the Snakes is all about. A horrifying and phenomenal technique used by Orochimaru, the Gathering of the Snakes helps him to stitch his body back together in an event where he has been cut into 2 halves. First seen in episode 42 of Naruto Shippuden, countless snakes appear from both ends when Orochimaru is cut into half at his midsection. In this scene, the snakes from one half unify with that of the other half, thereby stitching Orochimaru's body back together. Most importantly, this technique does not sustain any kind of damage dealt to the user by the assailant. Conversely, Orochimaru can also use these snakes to attack his targets, which is quite handy as you can imagine. Orochimaru-style body replacement technique. A signature Serpentine move, the Orochimaru-style body replacement technique is a spectacular display of the Sannin's prowess as far as strategies of endurance and survival are concerned. This is particularly used in 2 occasions. 1, as a last resort when the user sustains a severe injury, and 2, when the user must evade an incoming attack if he has been cornered from all sides. This technique of body replacement is facilitated by the user creating a body of his own and thus emerging from within the vessel via its mouth. The entire process resembles that of a snake shedding off its own skin. The Sword of Kusunagi. In his face-off against the 3rd Hokage, Orochimaru is seen drawing a sword from his body in episode 71 of Naruto. However, he did not draw it from a scabbard tied at his waist. Instead, a black snake emerged from his mouth, from which a shining sword ascended, and the snake shinobi wielded it with a malicious smirk. A reference to the Kusunagi in Japanese folklore, it's an unconventional sword that Orochimaru harbors inside his body and draws during combat. The sword emerges with the hilt coming out first so that the Sannin can wield it properly to fight against his enemies. Possessed by Orochimaru, a noteworthy feature of the Sword of Kusunagi is that it is controlled via telekinesis. In other words, one can extend the blade and move it around solely by using psychic powers. This is seen in his fight against Sarutobi when Orochimaru is able to injure the 3rd Hokage by manipulating the sword to stab him from behind. However, Orochimaru failed to pierce Naruto's 4-tailed form using his Sword of Kusunagi, meaning that it does have some limits. Senjutsu. Senjutsu, or Sage Jutsu in English, refers to a set of special techniques that can be executed only if a person has mastered the use of natural energy. The natural energy exists in the earth and the atmosphere, and those who are able to harness the same and fuse it with their own chakra eventually unlock the Sage mode to use Senjutsu. The Sage mode is an exceptional state of being in which their physical attributes and senses are heightened to a great extent, and it helps them to overcome their adversaries with superior strength and agility. Although he was unable to enter the state of Sage Mode, Orochimaru's Senjutsu is seen in the form of his cursed seals. The snake shinobi was able to develop a kind of enzyme from the bodily fluids of Jugo. This allows him to replicate and bestow a part of his powers on others. In short, the enzymes function as the foundation of his cursed seals as it feeds on the host chakra. This, in turn, facilitates the release of Orochimaru's Senjutsu during combat. Juinjutsu, or Orochimaru's Cursed Seal Technique. The Cursed Seal Technique is an offshoot of Orochimaru's specialty, which facilitates his use of Senjutsu by other individuals he's infected. This infection, so to speak, is made when Orochimaru bites the opponent's neck. The bite releases the same enzyme that Orochimaru had developed from Jugo's fluids, and this allows the person to use the Snake Shinobi's Senjutsu. At the same time, this technique absorbs a considerable amount of the individual's chakra, thus compelling them to resort to Orochimaru's techniques in life and death situations. An important feature of the Cursed Seals is that each contains a part of Orochimaru's soul, which actually binds them with Orochimaru's anatomy. It is quite similar to a pseudo-symbiotic relationship in which Orochimaru's Cursed Seal helps the user to enhance their own abilities and fight with special powers, while their own chakra is being fed on constantly by the same mark. In case you were wondering why we haven't yet talked about the famous technique, don't worry about it. We at Marvelous Anime like to keep things simple and save the best for last. So where were we? Ah yes, we were talking about simplicity and complexity. Although Orochimaru's powers and abilities are as complex as they come, the most impressive part of his anatomy is, quite surprisingly, his actual form when coupled with his immortality technique, which we'll delve into a little deeper in our final segment of this video. The Great White Snake of Immortality. The secret to Orochimaru's undying anatomy. One of the major revelations that takes place over the course of Naruto Shippuden, Episode 114 witnesses a body transfer ritual of Orochimaru from his own body to someone else's. Known as the Living Corpse Reincarnation Technique, it is the ultimate trump card of the Serpentine Sannin that would help him attain the immortality he needs to acquire all kinds of knowledge that exist in this world. The Living Corpse Reincarnation Technique was developed by Orochimaru himself, which was based on his obsession with eternal life, that is, life without the fear of death. This technique employs a soul transfer from Orochimaru's body into the body of the chosen vessel. This vessel is selected beforehand and well prepared by the Snake Shinobi as well as Kabuto, so as to execute the technique with much ease. Indeed, this is the reason why it is also called the Eternal Youth and Immortality Technique. After the soul transfer process, the Living Corpse Reincarnation Technique allows Orochimaru to overwrite the soul of the vessel with his own. This is also accompanied by the Facial Copy Technique, with which Orochimaru rewrites his own facial attributes on the vessel's face. However, that doesn't mean the host body is dead. In fact, the host's soul is kept alive within Orochimaru's innate dimension. In other words, their souls do persist after the technique, only for them to remain dormant and lose control over their own body. However, that doesn't mean that Orochimaru's true form is still the one that he had before he committed himself to a life of human experimentation in search of immortality. After conducting thousands of experiments upon test subjects and himself, Orochimaru managed to not only create the Living Corpse Reincarnation Jutsu to extend his own lifespan, he also ended up altering the form of his own original body. With the help of the White Snake's power of reincarnation as an intermediary and his own experimental discoveries besides, Orochimaru has transformed his true body into that of a great white snake. This is the fundamental reason why most of Orochimaru's techniques are snake-based. While he operates out of his vessels like he used to back when he was still a human, when he is put into extreme life or death situations, like the time he tried to take over Sasuke's body and failed, Orochimaru resorts to using his true self as his ultimate hidden ace. In this form, he is a massive white serpent whose head is still reminiscent of Orochimaru's, hair and all, but the rest of him appears to be anything but human. The great white serpent's body is composed of dozens upon dozens of smaller white snakes that Orochimaru can manipulate however he sees fit to attack his target. His strength and speed are astonishing considering the size of the form and the fact that he was on the verge of death when he released it. And if any normal shinobi were to somehow perform a dissection experiment on the great white snake, then they'd be left paralyzed the moment after their victory because of the toxins that come off of its internal body chemistry. The only reason Sasuke was able to resist the poison was because he had the curse mark, and he also developed a certain tolerance to the very things that his master's inspirations are so infamous for paralyzing their victims with. He then turned the tables on his master during the reincarnation ritual by absorbing Orochimaru into himself, which would have negative consequences for Sasuke, obviously, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Had Orochimaru been rested and still in possession of all his jutsu, it would have been a very different story. This brings us to the most powerful technique that Orochimaru is famous for, and it's none other than the 8 branches. Inspired by the legend of Yamada no Orochi, this form consists of 8 heads and 8 tails, deemed as the strongest serpent to ever exist. After all, Orochimaru's 8 branches technique was able to decimate the Uchiha refuge solely by crawling over the area on his abdominal scales. Another remarkable feature of the 8 branches is that Orochimaru can choose to regurgitate from the mouth of one of the snakeheads and wield his sword of Kusunagi to fight against his enemies. An intriguing fact about the development of this technique is that the anime and the manga have different takes on its inception. While the manga describes the 8 branches to be the product of Orochimaru's experiments over the years, coupled with the living corpse reincarnation, the anime says something else entirely. Here, it states that after defecting from the Leaf Village, the snake shinobi had stolen the scroll from the residence of the Hokage, which carried information on this technique. But it is to be noted that the 8 branches is actually a kinjutsu, forbidden from being practiced in the shinobi traditions. Either way, the impact of the 8 branches technique cannot be overstated. It debuted in the immediate aftermath of the battle between the Uchiha brothers. After Sasuke had pushed his chakra reserves beyond the point of exhaustion, the piece of Orochimaru's soul residing within his curse mark found its chance to escape imprisonment within Sasuke's body and burst forth in order to face off against Itachi Uchiha. But Orochimaru did not show up in his great white snake form. He showed up in his Yamada no Orochi 8-headed Hydra serpent form, and the scuffle that followed, whilst brief, was still enough to show us the true snake-like tenacity of Orochimaru. Despite putting up a fairly decent struggle against Itachi's Susanoo, a technique that is said to be the last thing anyone going up against it will ever experience, his hubris ends up getting the best of him as always. Itachi stabs Orochimaru with the Totsuka blade, an ethereal superweapon that the Serpentine ninja had been searching for his entire life. The Totsuka blade essentially absorbs the soul of its target into itself and traps them within an unending genjutsu. It basically erases its target from existence, and viewers had thought that surely we were now rid of Orochimaru once and for all, right? But then the 4th Shinobi War rolls around and we learn that he had another way to reincarnate hidden up his sleeve all along, and what's worse is it was in plain sight. Remember how we told you that cursed seals store a portion of Orochimaru's soul in the person afflicted with them to allow them to harness his senjutsu powers? Well, what happens if you place a lump of flesh charged by the same senjutsu upon one of these curse marks and then reverse the hand seals for a regular sealing jutsu? You guessed it, you bring Orochimaru back to life. And not just that, the 4th Shinobi War arc also ended up potentially giving Orochimaru something that has been the basis of this entire video, an eternal and undying body. See, after being revived using that curse reversal method we just talked about by none other than Sasuke, Orochimaru not only manages to get all his jutsu back, he also acquires a body that pretty much represents the pinnacle of healing jutsu in all of Naruto. During Sasuke's quest for answers, Orochimaru undoes the Reaper Death Seal to bring back the 4 Kage stored within its belly, which gives him his jutsu back because, remember, the 3rd Hokage had sealed those within the Reaper all the way back in part 1. After doing so, he leaves his currently dying vessel and enters the body of a white Zetsu clone, and this is what we think fills Orochimaru's quest for immortality, because white Zetsu is basically a very inferior clone of Hashirama Senju, who was renowned for being able to heal any and all injuries with blinding speed and without the use of hand seals. Orochimaru himself had experimented with Hashirama's cells in the past and created Captain Yamato of Squad 7 as a result of it, but he could never quite graft those cells into his own body in a way that would effectively ensure immortality. However, the body of a white Zetsu will pretty much keep reforming itself unless it's utterly annihilated, and the Zetsu itself can no longer put itself back together, physically and cognitive. By taking over the body of such a self-regenerating being, Orochimaru is practically an immortal being, because the one limitation he had with his personal reincarnation technique was the resistance of the host personality, which usually forced him to look for other bodies. With the white Zetsu clones, he would have to face no such complications because the white Zetsus have a rather docile and splintered personality to begin with. On top of that, their immense regenerative powers end up negating any other physical limitation that Orochimaru might have faced if he had reincarnated into a normal body. It has been implied in the successor show of Naruto that Orochimaru has not taken taken another body since the 4th Shinobi War, and given the fact that the successor show is about Naruto's teenage son, and Orochimaru used to have to change bodies in 3 years, we'd say it's safe to assume that after 700 plus episodes of villainry and chivalry and everything in between, Orochimaru managed to accomplish his lifelong dream, however twisted and disturbing his means to that end might have been. Marvelous verdict! Yes, for the average Naruto fan, we may have left out a lot of details from the storyline itself. Sadly, we really didn't have much of a choice since there is so much talk about Orochimaru. As a matter of fact, this video would have ended up becoming an academic lecture on Orochimaru as a cultural phenomenon in the Naruto verse. Yes, he's a bad guy, but that's exactly what makes him so terrifying and awesome at the same time. His ambitions intertwined with his twisted personality, Orochimaru's psyche and anatomy deserve much attention, from being one of the most formidable antagonists in the Naruto franchise to becoming an important researcher for the benefit of Leaf Shinobis. Orochimaru's journey is as serpentine as his own perceptions. Perhaps this is typical of characters who are obsessed with perfection. They often sacrifice the best of their own selves in order to seek the unattainable. After all, the lust for their ambitions often blinds them from experiencing the nuances in life that motivate them to make the right choices. Hence, Orochimaru's interest in snakes is a mere embodiment of his own twisted nature, and yet he looks for ways to heal humanity from the disease of mortality by looking for the secrets of eternal life.